Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Well, the world watches and waits for a response after the Obama administration declared this week that there is very little doubt the Syrian government used chemical weapons against its own people. President Obama said Wednesday that any action taken by the U.S. is meant to serve as a warning, not get America into another long-term conflict.
If, in fact, we can take limited, tailored approaches, not getting drawn into a long conflict. But if we are saying in a clear and decisive but very limited way, we send a shot across the bow saying, stop doing this, that can have a positive impact on our national security over the long term and may have a positive impact in the sense that chemical weapons are not used again on innocent civilians.
Joining the panel this week, Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, foreign affairs columnist Bret Stephens, and editorial board member Mary Anastasia O'Grady. Okay, Bret, so you've heard the president's case and a lot of off-the-background briefings by administration officials saying small, brief, limited attack, 2-3 days, just cruise missiles, just send a message. What do you think of that case?
Well, I think in the plan that the president is outlining is probably one that isn't worth doing. We might
really,
we might get the worst of all worlds. In 1998, Bill Clinton did something very similar against Saddam Hussein, a brief strike of 3 cruise missiles, bombs, 3 days, and the result was Saddam became more emboldened, more popular, was able to shake off the sanctions. That's what we're risking now. We should be targeting Assad. We should make it crystal clear to Bashar Assad and his regime that the price to be paid for using chemical weapons will be extremely high, and send that signal also to all the other would-be dictators around the world about what it means to use chemical weapons. Otherwise, he's going to go into his bunker, come out and say, look, I survived the American attack.
But Dan, the response to that of the critics would be, okay, there they go again, Iraq. Okay, going to get us into a quagmire, big operation. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, I would mention one other country over there, Paul, and that's Iran. Iran is supplying Assad with arms. They're the resupplied thing. And if he wins, the Iranians will, I think, gain hegemony in the Middle East, because all of the other allies of the Saudi Arabia, the Qataris, are going to pull back and say we've got to do business with the Iranians because they helped Assad win.
But is Syrian involvement of the kind Bret recommends, is this a recipe for another Iraq? That's the criticism.
Bret said nothing about boots on the ground. He said nothing about sending large numbers of American troops into Syria. That's not what's being discussed right here. The question is whether we're going to do something to hit Assad, probably from long range, that would make him think twice, say, about using air power against the Syrian opposition. There has been no suggestion whatsoever that we're going to put troops or even planes over Syria.
But then are you talking about the pinprick attacks that Obama's talking about?
No, I'm talking about the sort of things that we editorialized about in the journals, using Tomahawk missiles on destroyers in the Mediterranean, hundreds of miles away, to hit Syrian air bases, to suppress the relatively small air force, about 100, maybe 50 viable planes that have been bombing the opposition over there. In other words, deter Assad from carrying out the attacks on the opposition.
And degrade his air force to the point that it cannot
That's not
be
a pinprick. That's more than a shot across the bow.
You persuaded by the president's case, Mary?
You know, I think if the president wants to take action in Syria, he has to get public support. I mean, there's a lot of discussion in Congress about whether he can do this without congressional approval, but he's got to get the American people to understand what he's trying to do. And, you know, if he, in fact, he's trying to deter Assad from future action, then he has to make a case for a stronger strike, maybe something that does take out the Air Force. If he's trying to, I mean, one of the things that we don't know is what is his longer-term objective about what happens when Assad is gone. You know, there are these arguments made that really there are good rebels and there are bad rebels, and the good rebels can win out over the bad rebels, but there's no example I don't think you can find an example in the Middle East of where that's happened.
But Mary, the implication of
time.
what you're saying is we should just stay out because we don't know what's going to come after. I think you're
No,
making...
I think it's okay to say to the American people, we're going to use this as a deterrent. We cannot, but be honest about the fact that we're not really believing in the idea that we're going to build a founding fathers kind of democracy in Syria.
But this is I'm sorry, but that's part of the naivete of America, which is that, oh, we're not going to get another Jeffersonian republic in the Middle East, therefore we want no part of this. We have real strategic interests
What are they?
In the Middle East.
What are they?
Okay, we don't like dictators using weapons of mass destruction. You remember 10 years ago we said we won't let the most dangerous weapons get in the hands of the most murderous dictators. They're in their hands and they're being used. We don't want the Syrian civil war to spill over into all of its neighbors, and that is precisely what is happening.
Destabilizing
Lebanon,
Jordan, perhaps.
Jordan, our one
Iraq.
moderate ally, Iraq, Turkey, Israel. We don't want Iran to gain or consolidate its place in the Arab world. That is precisely what it's doing, and that's why it's all in Syria. The Iranians understand what the stakes are. We don't understand what the stakes are. And finally, and above all, we don't want to send a signal to other dictators who may be tempted to use chemical weapons in other kinds of situations that the West will not respond in any meaningful way. That's precisely what the West did in 1935-36 in Ethiopia, and it's what led to World War II. It's what we're doing today.
What about Mary's point that the president needs to win the public support and probably have to go to Congress to get it? If not for an official vote, at least have them more or less on board.
Whether the president's obligated to go to Congress or not is another issue.
That's a legal issue.
That's a legal issue.
I'm asking about it as a prudential political issue.
I agree about the political side of it. The president has been standing back, letting this problem rip, letting people make up their own minds. And in a case like this, that's not what a commander-in-chief should be doing. He should be out front, shaping public opinion. That doesn't mean he has to drive it in a direction he wants, but the American people expect him to be addressing them when something in the world that we're engaged in is going on. And he has been AWOL.
He spent 5 years telling us we want to disengage from the Middle East. We have no national security interest there. We have to rebuild at home. And now he wants to persuade the American public to act. No wonder he's having a hard time persuading them to act.